Gladiator is a bad, poorly written, and overrated movie. Says who? A random guy on YouTube. Hi everyone. Couple of months ago, Ridley Scott confirmed that the script for Gladiator 2 is currently being written.
They're making more?
Ridley Scott will proceed to this project once he's done with the movie about Napoleon. So I see it as a good opportunity to talk about the original Gladiator, which was released more than 20 years ago and became a prominent example of historical inaccuracies in the films. But actually, these inaccuracies constitute only half of a problem. I will obviously talk about them as well. What do you expect? But also, I will try to explain why Gladiator is simply not good. I'm gonna structure this video like they do with all these top 10 reasons why something is wrong. Or more like top 9 actually. It is easier this way for everybody. But first, we will have a brief introduction. When you're accusing a Hollywood blockbuster of historical inaccuracies and taking unnecessary liberties with the source material, people are gonna look at you like you're being too nerdy right now. Relax, it's just a movie. Pointing out all of the mistakes is funny, so let's do this, but in the end, don't overreact. It is a big budget production. That's Hollywood. It's understandable. There's a tradition of these sword and sandal movies, and it is a good film, cinematic. Not a big deal. I think it's a big deal, actually. And we're not talking about some run-of-the-mill sword and sandal flick or a campy TV series. We're talking about the film that received 12 Oscar nominations and won 5, including the Best Picture. The film with a budget of approximately $100 million. Adjusted for inflation, it is something like $160 million. You expect a certain level of quality, but you have a bunch of high-paid industry professionals who make all sorts of stupid mistakes, amateur mistakes, unforgivable mistakes. Here's an interesting piece of trivia for you. When Russell Crowe joined the project, it had a script of 21 pages. Not a script, really. He read it, and as he admitted later, and I quote, Gladiator was a unique experience because the script that they had was so bad. It was just so bad.
We had 21 pages when we started shooting.
21?
Yeah, your average script is about 110. You know, it's the dumbest possible way to make a film. At one point in time, Ridley gave the crew a day off because we simply didn't know what we were going to shoot the next day. He'd gone down there, he'd picked some locations, the sets were dressed, but we didn't have any pages. When we arrived in Morocco, we'd already run out of the first 21 pages that we had. So we had to write like furious people over that weekend. But we also had a number of other people who kept submitting stuff, you know.
They tried to improvise and improve this abomination. But you know...
But whatever they did, it wasn't enough!
And now we can proceed to our top list of sorts. The list of problems. The first one is historicity. There's a large number of mistakes and creative liberties that the production team took with the source material. I fully understand that some of the liberties are absolutely necessary, and this is the work of fiction, not a documentary. But yeah, it is based on historical events. And given the state of the primary sources, some of the liberties are not only justifiable, but even desirable. Kingdom of Heaven, another film by Ridley Scott, is actually a nice example. It's a very good movie if you watch the director's cut. And there were numerous liberties taken. But given the source material, yeah, it's kind of okay. But it is not okay in the case of Gladiator. This depiction of the reign of Commodus is just horrible and wrong on many levels. It could be perceived in a more positive light if Gladiator was marketed as an alternate history movie, kind of like Inglourious Bastards, which is, if you don't know, is Quentin Tarantino's World War II film where, spoiler alert, main characters kill Hitler. It is a straightforward alternate history, and that's precisely one of the reasons why it is so interesting. You get this unexpected plot twist. Gladiator was never marketed as an alternate history. It is more or less presented as a historical movie. And actually, Ridley Scott hired a consultant for the production, a Harvard University professor, Kathleen Coleman. But eventually, she found out that her feedback and expertise is largely ignored. So she's listed in the credits without her job title. Because otherwise, it would have been embarrassing. The number of mistakes in the movie is just mind blowing. And it is not a fun movie like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. No questions there. But this is a serious production, which raises a number of serious questions, and these questions are frequently ignored. And questions like, okay, we have a certain historical period and a number of sources, which are not very good, but we have some, and we have a general understanding of the events, the timeline, etc. What we're doing to this material is a big deal because the audience gets a very twisted impression of the history of Rome and the culture of Rome. And, okay, imagine the situation. Somebody releases a movie, which obviously takes certain liberties. It's not a documentary after all. This is a movie about, say, the American War of Independence. To make this material more interesting, they change a couple of historical facts. So the movie goes kind of like this. Abraham Lincoln kills his father, George Washington, by shoving his wooden jaw down his throat and starts the Civil War against the French, because the French are evil and they like slavery a lot. That's just mental and kind of insulting for a large number of people. You can make up any other comparable story based on the history of any other country of the world. It is just an example. This is nonsense. This is ridiculous and probably quite offensive. This is too much. And this is exactly the situation of Gladiator. Exactly. They took a certain period in history and they just completely destroyed everything. People don't think about this aspect of sword and sandal movies, mostly because ancient Romans are dead for a really long time. It's hard to insult them. So everything is treated not as history, but as fantasy, like Lord of the Rings. But this is not Lord of the Rings. At least half of the world, probably even more, to some extent are indebted to ancient Greeks and Romans. So in a way, we're told nonsensical and insulting stories about our cultural ancestors. Commodus, Marcus, and Lucilla. Commodus was a problematic emperor. I actually made a video about his reign and some other additional videos about certain connected things. In short, well, what they were doing in Gladiator is, first of all, paying homage to the genre and the film called The Fall of the Roman Empire in particular. Some of the key ideas for the story were just borrowed from this movie. They took the ideas of Commodus, the idea of Marcus Aurelius, the idea that Commodus killed Marcus Aurelius, the idea of Lucilla as a character, and the idea of a brave Roman general who had to be a new emperor instead of Commodus, but it just never happened. And then this general had a one-on-one combat with Commodus. The reality was completely different. Commodus never killed Marcus Aurelius. That's just stupid. Marcus Aurelius was his biggest political ally. He fast-tracked Commodus to the title of the emperor, or Augustus. The idea that he wanted to disinherit Commodus wasn't there. Commodus was already the emperor at the time of the death of Marcus. They were co-rulers. Marcus Aurelius didn't want to restore the republic and abolish the principate. This idea is also simply stupid. Americans just like the republican form of government and like to talk about democracy, even when, say, Athenian democracy has very little in common with the American version of democracy. Also, Marcus Aurelius is known as a Stoic philosopher, and Stoics traditionally had this anti-tyranny, pro-republican stance. But nobody really wanted to restore the republic of old, and technically Rome was still a republic. Let's change our government to a republic. You already live in the republic. What the hell do you want? Yes, everyone understood that it was pretty much an elective monarchy in disguise, but that was kind of fine. They lived like this for a couple of centuries. And the second century actually was the peak of Roman civilization. Most of the population probably wished that Antoninus Pius could live forever and rule forever. Marcus never indicated that he wanted to change the form of government and abolish the principate. In fact, he was doing pretty much the opposite. He made it very clear that he must be succeeded by his son, who probably wasn't his biological son. This rumor is also mentioned in The Fall of the Roman Empire. But it is just a rumor. Commodus was his one and only choice, and it was an obvious and very logical choice. Probably the best choice available at the time. Nothing indicated that Commodus will become one of the most controversial Roman emperors. Now, his sister, Lucilla. Well, ancient historians don't like her either. She staged the assassination attempt on Commodus, and theoretically, that's why historians should like her, since they hate Commodus so much. But no, they tell us that her motives were weird and she wasn't really that much better than Commodus. This famous assassination attempt happened something like a year or two into the reign of Commodus, and it was quite stupid. A guy with a sword attacking the emperor and screaming, "The Senate sends you regards," something like that. And then he was dispatched. The problem here is that this is the event that quite probably made Commodus quite paranoid. He started his rule pretty well. He wasn't really eccentric early in his reign, like at all. But after this "the Senate sends you regards" incident staged by your sister, who probably was conspiring, well, with the Senate, that actually made him the enemy of the Senate. It made him paranoid and made him seek the approval of common people through the acts of shameless political PR. In a way, Lucilla unleashed this Commodus we know of. And as a result of this action, eventually she was killed. Obviously. That's it. End of story for her. Lucilla had at least 4 children we know of. One of them was Lucius Verus, the younger, the boy you can see in the movie, named after his father, the former co-emperor of Marcus Aurelius. We don't really know what happened to Lucius Verus the younger, but we know that he died as a child. He was probably dead by the time Commodus became the emperor. Lucilla had another son from her second marriage, and he actually survived and became a consul under Septimius Severus. And later he was killed by Caracalla. Probably. We don't know for sure. Commodus reigned as a sole ruler for something like 12 years. Well, in the movie, his reign lasted for, it's hard to say, really hard to say, a year or two, maybe 4. And that seriously contradicts history. And no, he never died in the arena. Gladiatorial Combat. This is something that is usually not addressed enough when people talk about the films about the Roman Empire, and frequently not addressed at all when people talk about Gladiator and its historical inaccuracies. The depiction of gladiatorial combat in this film is simply wrong. Actually, there are no movies in existence that try to depict gladiatorial combat more or less realistically. Zero. They all go for this blood and gore. It is a stereotype, and it is a malignant stereotype because it gives you a false impression of society in the period of antiquity. This is not how people lived. Uh, there are various reasons why this stereotype came to existence, but basically, it is a 19th or even an 18th century idea that's been routinely reproduced in the popular culture, and you can see it in the films of the 20th and 21st centuries, even despite the fact that this idea of total bloodbath is not accepted by modern historians at all. And when people hear about it for the first time, they sometimes go like, "Oh, that's revisionism. Revisionism is bad." They have an interesting concept of what revisionism means. There's nothing wrong with revisionism, actually. And history is constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted when you have a new understanding and new data. What they said about gladiatorial combat in the 18th century is considered simply inaccurate right now. One of the main sources of this misunderstanding, and I made a video about it, comes from the fact that people in the 18th and 19th centuries had no idea of how professional sport works. They figured this out only in the 20th century. Probably the closest modern analogy of gladiatorial combat is professional wrestling. It is true that modern historians usually don't put it this way, they do it more mildly. But I believe it is the best explanation. You know, scripted combat, very low number of casualties. People died mostly by accident because deliberate killing of the opponent was absolutely prohibited. Professional gladiators cost a lot of money, and not all of them were actually slaves. And this is business. You can't just kill sportsmen for no reason. When you're watching a football game, you're not expecting the losing team to be decapitated immediately. For a number of reasons, practical and cultural. Not only are you losing money, but it is also violent and gross. It was a different society back then. But no, they were not monsters. Although, yeah, they apparently killed a lot of animals in the arena. But they tried to minimize the amount of blood here as well, and employ trained beasts and stuff. Minimization of needless slaughter increases your return on investment. So, what we're seeing in the movies has nothing to do with reality. People usually go like, relax, it is just a movie, trope, entertainment, and no, this is a historical film and this is not how it happened. If I'm making a movie about football and show how they kill each other during the World Cup or Super Bowl or whatever, and actually I use it to illustrate the idea that society is depraved because they like this kind of stuff, this is gonna be really weird. The same should be applied to the films about the ancient world. This is wrong. This is laughable, and it damages your perception of antiquity. It is about time we start mercilessly ridiculing people who portray gladiatorial combat in this traditional sword and sandal fashion. Names and places. As we all know, the name of the main character is Maximus Decimus Meridius. It is not really a name. The guy has a prenomen as a nomen, and he has a cognomen as a prenomen. That's just weird. That's not a Roman name, or at least not a Roman name from the period of classical antiquity. something like Decimus Meridius Maximus, or probably even Maximus Meridius, would be more appropriate. And when he enters the arena, he's announced as Ilius Maximus for no reason. The problem here is not only that it is just ridiculous, it goes deeper. At least 3 people were writing the script, and all of them are industry professionals, and they are well paid. And they never bothered to spend 10 minutes on basic research on how Roman names work. That's incompetence, the work of an amateur. This is amateur screenwriting, amateur world building, amateur fact checking, and a very high level of not giving a flying about doing your job properly. These people just don't care. It is not a question of, well, it is not relevant and why bother? Nobody's gonna notice. It is a question of, why are you hiring these people? They'd probably be kicked out of the job in 90% of the print media, or I don't know, even from the narrative designer position in the video games industry, where the bar is not really high. Not really high at all. You can hire a random person on the street, and he'd probably care about the job more. He'd act more responsibly and will do at least some basic research. But these people just don't care. They have an interesting concept of work ethic. And no, they don't stop at things like names of the characters. Oh no. Let's take a closer look at names, places, and the whole logic behind it. We find our character, Maximus, in the military camp somewhere around Vindabona, which is present-day Vienna. The legions are doing some weird stuff there, which includes running around screaming Roma Victor, which is grammatically incorrect. And they are also big fans of making SPQR tattoos, for no reason. At some point, Maximus needs to travel back home to Hispania, because he's a Spaniard, which is inaccurate as well, but at least it makes some sense. It gives the audience some understanding of where he's from. So, wounded Maximus sits on a horse and rides to some place in Hispania. We don't know which place exactly, but for the sake of conversation, let's pick some point on a map. Since his name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, maybe he's running to the territory of present-day city of Merida, which was called Emerita Augusta at the time. That is why it is called Merida today. It's a corruption of the original name. The distance between Vienna and Merida, if you open Google Maps, it is something about 2,600 kilometers or 1,600 miles. That's a long way. It is implied that the journey takes quite a bit of time, but this quite a bit of time is, well, it is usually believed that a trail horse can cover the distance of 80 kilometers or 50 miles a day. And horses actually need to rest for a day or two. You can go faster at full speed, but the horse will probably die, which actually happens in the movie. But all in all, this kind of journey can easily take at least a month. I understand that the screenwriters needed to teleport the character from one location to another, but seriously, that doesn't really work this way. The next destination of Maximus and the slave traders who captured him is Zucabar, or the Roman province of Zucabar, as it is called in the movie, which features some nice Islamic architecture, since all of this was filmed around the UNESCO heritage site in Morocco. So we have another weird instance of teleportation, this time from the territory of present-day Spain to the territory of present-day Algeria. They probably took a ship or something. Quite a trip, really. They're just jumping all over the Mediterranean, from Vienna to Spain, from Spain to North Africa, and then from North Africa to Rome. And yeah, obviously, there was no province called Zucabar. Zucabar was a city, and the province was called Mauritania Caizarensis. Along the way, Maximus meets his token black friend called Juba. And Juba says he's Numidian, which is quite interesting, not only because Numidian is a much later term, but also because Numidians were not, sub-Saharan black. The character is played by Jaiman Unsu, and he's from Benin. Look at the map where Benin is and where Algeria is. We don't know much about Numidians, but anthropologically, they were, well, North Africans. They can be considered predecessors and ancestors of modern Berbers. The screenwriters never cared about stuff like that. Numidia is somewhere in Africa, all Africans are black, so yeah, this line of thinking. Septimius Severus was a black emperor of Rome because he was born in Africa. Yeah, like hell he was. Go and tell these stories to Berbers and watch their reaction. They absolutely love this kind of stuff. Slavery, Roman law, and Christians. When Maximus arrives to Hispania, he falls unconscious and promptly becomes enslaved by slave traders who were passing by. Because that's what they usually do. They walk around Hispania and grab random people. I mean, lots of interesting stuff was happening in the ancient world. Slave traders were capturing people, and they were doing it quite regularly when we're dealing with the Mediterranean pirates in the early period. But we're in Hispania, and they are enslaving a Roman citizen and a Roman general. Mediterranean pirates actually captured Julius Caesar once, and no, they never enslaved him. They demanded ransom, and it had some consequences. But okay, they enslaved the Roman citizen and sold him in the market, and the buyer didn't care that he's buying a citizen of Rome. Oh, he's just some deserter. Not a big deal. This situation is really strange. It will probably have serious repercussions. But this is not how it works. And they're actually selling the guy in a Roman city under the authority of the Roman law. That's just bizarre. In Zucabar, people are doing all kinds of interesting, obviously absurd stuff, like gladiatorial combat. They're also killing slaves for no reason, which is not only cruel and stupid, but also more or less illegal. You can't just kill anyone you want whenever you want, or force a slave to do whatever you want. And yeah, slavery in Rome was seriously different from what you can see in most of the movies about Rome. These slave people of Zucabar also include a scribe who is fluent in 7 languages. Nobody cares. They just send him to the arena to be killed in the first fight, which makes no sense whatsoever. A scribe who can speak in 7 languages is an asset. He was worth probably more than all of these people fighting in the arena of Zucabar combined. Instead of selling him and making a lot of money, they just butcher him, illegally butcher him. Because the owners are idiots. They don't care about money. Somewhere in Zucabar, we also briefly can see Christians. And Christianity is hinted at a couple of times in the movie, which is absolutely inaccurate. I mean, we can talk about it all day, but in short, 2nd century Christianity? Really? No. Just no. At some point, Commodus also tells Maximus amusing stories that his son squealed like a girl when they nailed him to the cross. And Maximus tells people that his family was burned and crucified. This is where the movie follows the false narrative of the Christian religion. nailing people to the cross or a T-shaped structure, that's a myth. Romans never practiced this. That's just deliberate mistranslations of the Latin word crux and the Greek stauros. I'll make a separate video about this at some point. 150 days of games. As discussed earlier, the depiction of gladiatorial combat is absolutely inaccurate. But yeah, there were massive games staged by Commodus late in his reign. Not 150 days of games, so that's just ridiculous, but yeah, quite massive. Commodus was a huge fan of games and used it as a vehicle for his PR. And he actually participated in the games himself. That was his thing. In the movie, you can see that Commodus fights Maximus in the arena. And this combat decides the fate of the empire and its government, which is stupid beyond words. Maximus wins and starts to give orders like, we need to reinstate this senator, that senator, we need to revert to a proper republic. This is just mental. This is not how things work. This is politics through the eyes of a 5-year-old or a professional Hollywood screenwriter. Okay, Commodus the Gladiator. Commodus wasn't the first Roman emperor to participate in gladiatorial combat, although he's sometimes erroneously presented as the first. We don't know who was the first emperor to do this, but we know that Titus performed as a gladiator a century before Commodus. But Commodus turned everything up to 11. He was regularly participating in the games, and he was an unbeatable champion of the arena. And the audience apparently really liked him. He was obviously slaying a lot of beasts, although it is unlikely that he killed like 100 animals in one day as reported by Cassius Dio. But he was also fighting human gladiators. It is never mentioned in the movies, including this Netflix pseudo-documentary or a docudrama, Commodus' Reign of Blood, which I might review at some point. But Commodus actually fought with a wooden sword. Because, yeah, gladiatorial combat is not about killing people. It is also mentioned in the sources that Marcus Aurelius prohibited the use of sharp weapons in the arena, probably just to avoid excessive traumatic consequences. So all the weapons were blunt, and it is very unlikely that Commodus ever changed this law. Once again, the guy fought with a wooden sword. The movie mentions that Marcus Aurelius stopped all the games and Commodus revived this practice, which is simply not true. Marcus Aurelius never abolished games. He never liked them, obviously. Most of the emperors didn't like them. It was considered something of an entertainment for the lower classes. What else can we see during these 150 days of games? Well, obligatory thumbs up and thumbs down cliche. Nobody knows what it means and was it really used at all. The gladiators obviously use this famous gladiatorial salute. We who are about to die salute you. I made a video about this some time ago. This is the phrase from a source on the reign of Claudius, and the people who said this line were convicted criminals and not professional gladiators at all. They were literally about to die. They were sentenced to death. Sweet Home, Alabama. Commodus and Lucilla have a very interesting relationship in the movie. Commodus likes his sister a lot. Seriously a lot. To a point where he wants to have babies with her. This is just disgusting. The sources kind of imply that Commodus was into his sisters. Well, Historia Augusta bluntly says that after debauching his other sisters, as it is said, he formed an amour with a cousin of his father and even gave the name of his mother to one of his concubines. But this is a highly unreliable Historia Augusta. And these are ancient historians. They just had a tradition of saying things like that about bad emperors. As I mentioned before in one of the videos, if you read a historian and he mentions incest or something comparable, this is a headshot in his character assassination attempt. You should never believe this, and 99% of modern historians don't take these wild claims seriously. But the screenwriters apparently were like, oh, that's a great idea. No, that's not a great idea, even for pornography. Speaking of private life of Commodus, when you're reading about the historical inaccuracies of Gladiator on the internet, which is a popular genre for more than 2 decades now, people occasionally go like, well, the character of Commodus was in fact much more sinister than what we see in the movie. And they give some information like he had 300 concubines. No, not really. This is just another wild anecdote from Historia Augusta, and nothing more. And the biography of Commodus in Historia Augusta is absolutely unreadable. It's a mess. Anecdotes upon anecdotes not confirmed by anything. Other sources like Cassius Dio and Herodian hate Commodus as well, but don't go to these extremities, like 300 concubines. And these people who report this nonsense as a historical fact are actually a bit shy to tell you that the second part of this anecdote, because Historia Augusta tells us that Commodus also had 300 male concubines, so to speak. Even some of the translations of Historia Augusta are a bit shy about this. Loeb Classical Library Edition translates puberibus exoletis as millions, by the way, when the original clearly speaks of adult males. All of this is garbage. Small details. Small details is another problem because, as we mentioned earlier, screenwriters just don't care, don't research the material, they don't fact check. And as you might expect, there are numerous details in the movie that are just wrong. It is pointless to cover them all, so I'll just give you one especially bad example. There's this inscription on the wooden sword that was given to Proxima by Marcus Aurelius. We can actually ignore some of the inscriptions in the movie, but this one is a close-up shot. It just hits you in the face. You could make it more appropriate and not a crying shame. What do we see? We see Marcus Aurelius, which is an incorrect way of writing the names of the officials. It most probably would have been in the abbreviated form and not just his nomen and prenomen. It also uses the letter U instead of V, which was not in use back then. And there are weird dates. We see the years 914 and 922. And it doesn't make any sense. This is dating ab urbe condita, from the foundation of the city of Rome. If you translate it into the common era, it's going to be like 162 and 169. The problem here is that Romans didn't use ab urbe condita. They used the years of the consuls. Although dating from the foundation is mentioned in some of the sources, so it was done sometimes, but not officially. They switched to another system only much later. And in this later period, some people apparently used the AD, the new era, which kind of started almost a century after Commodus. I mean, the original AD, Anno Diocletiani, the age of Diocletian. Later, this abbreviation was appropriated by Christians. This is a very complex story, actually. Complex and controversial. A dream that was Rome. We have some really bad dialogues in Gladiator, which was even mentioned by Russell Crowe himself. And I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. Russell Crowe literally said about this particular line that, and I quote, "It was shit, but I'm the greatest actor in the world and I can make even shit sound good." I will just mention here my favorite line in the movie, this infamous, "There was once a dream that was Rome, you could only whisper it." This is just ridiculous. And Gladiator launched this stupid line into the mass culture. And now, if you're watching a video about ancient Rome on YouTube, there's a 50% probability that someone is quoting this line in the comment section. There's always a guy who does just that. This video will probably have a dream that was Rome comment at some point as well. Summary. Time to sum this all up. We're not talking here about the art direction, CGI, or acting, or why this dumb action movie sometimes becomes surprisingly pedestrian, or why you have a gazillion cuts in any action scene. That's not important. We're mostly talking about screenwriting. And the screenwriting is horrible. Yeah, it's watchable. It's Ridley Scott, and you probably wouldn't believe it, but I'm a big fan of his work. He's a brilliant director. But what we're watching here, this kind of movies promote the trend that you can write literally anything about antiquity, and it should be accepted. And it damages our perception of antiquity and human history in general. It is true that Gladiator sometimes sparks interest in the history of Rome in some people, which kind of explains the existence of these guys with a dream that was Rome quote. But as I've said numerous times, this movie's style idea of antiquity is twisted and harmful. The origins of the Western civilization uh, become a joke. It is a continuation of the 18th century writing when ancient Romans were methodically presented as cruel and stupid perverts, despite the fact that Greco-Roman culture is the foundation of the Western civilization and in many ways the foundation of human civilization as a whole. Roman law is a thing even in China. Ancient Romans are our cultural ancestors. Go and make a movie about, say, ancient Jews, where this ethno-religious group will be presented as, I don't know, bloodthirsty cannibals. You'll be immediately ostracized and accused of all of their mortal sins. And there are reasons for that. But when you're doing basically the same thing with Romans, nobody cares. It's Hollywood, not a big deal. The film of the year. Give them 5 Oscars. For slandering Romans, and for amateur screenwriting. Everybody got used to that. But we shouldn't be used to that. And we shouldn't ignore this. Because culturally, we are Greeks and we are Romans. Stop cheating on our fathers. Thank you for watching. And see you soon.